Star Wars is expanding in a big way later this year when The Acolyte premieres on Disney+. It'll be the first live-action Star Wars project that takes place outside of the 70-year portion of the timeline that encompasses the Skywalker Saga. Not only that, but we've got 2 movies on the way that will introduce brand new eras to Star Wars. No, not those kinds of eras. Today I'm going to explain every era of Star Wars history. The Dawn of the Jedi era takes place around 25,000 years before the events of Star Wars A New Hope, or possibly even earlier. We don't have exact dates for this era because it's the part of the timeline we know the least about. I would guess that it lasts for about 5,000 years, bringing us to 20,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, when the Old Republic begins to take shape. As the name suggests, this era surrounds the creation of the Jedi Order, which we currently know very little about. Fortunately, that story is on the way in the form of a film by James Mangold. For now, there are a couple of events we know happened for sure. Professor Huyang, the droid most recently seen in Ahsoka, was activated around this time, so he is old. It's likely the first Jedi temples were constructed, like the one seen on Ahch-To, and that brings us to the Prime Jedi, who is said to be the founder of the Order, but they could be a mythical or metaphorical figure. As the Jedi Order grew in size, connected organizations like the Ordo Aspectu were created out of their philosophies. Seen in the Dr. Aphra comics, the Aspectu became a rival of sorts to the Jedi, leading to conflict. Since this era is a part of the Star Wars timeline, I can't imagine the creation of the Jedi Order will be completely peaceful and without struggle. Star Wars Legends had a handful of stories covering this era, most notably with the novel Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void and the Dawn of the Jedi comics. The basics are that some mysterious ancient starships called Tho-Yor picked up Force sensitives across the galaxy and delivered them to the planet Tython, where they started something called the Jedi Order. Of course, conflict broke out and the light side users prevailed, transitioning into the Jedi Order. A group of conquering aliens called the Rakata were also involved. Their homeworld, Rakata Prime, as well as Tython are both canon planets, but I really doubt any of those story elements will be brought into James Mangold's film. I would expect the canon Dawn of the Jedi to be a fresh start. The Old Republic era starts about 20,000 years before the events of A New Hope, but right now that's unconfirmed, so it could start later. Those are the dates we know that an alliance was first formed between the planets Coruscant, Corellia, Alderaan, and more, which created the foundation for what would become the Republic. This is also around the time that hyperspace travel wasn't necessarily first discovered, but it at least became more widespread. This era goes all the way until 500 years before the Battle of Yavin, so it's easily one of the longest eras on the timeline. It's during this time that we see the creation of the Sith Order and their ongoing war with the Jedi. That begins around 5,000 years BBY, when the Sith splinter out of the Jedi during a time called the 100-Year Darkness. The galaxy sees the rise of the Sith Empire and leaders like Darth Revan and Darth Bane. The Sith Wars last for 4,000 years until the Darksiders are nearly destroyed and thought to be extinct. In the midst of that, the Jedi also come across Mandalorians, who start a war of their own. A Mandalorian Jedi named Tar Vizsla constructs the Darksaber, and the Jedi build their primary temple on Coruscant. When the wars come to an end, the Old Republic is reorganized into the Galactic Republic. This era of Star Wars has been almost entirely shaped by legend stories. We know of certain events thanks to reference books and mentions in other stories, but there have been no canon stories set in this era yet. I believe that's because the Old Republic MMO is still receiving updates. It, along with the Knights of the Old Republic video games, are not canon, but I think Lucasfilm is staying out of that era for now to avoid confusion. The High Republic era begins 500 years before the events of the Star Wars films and lasts for 4 centuries. It's seen as a golden age for the Republic and the Jedi Order, who are both at the height of their power and idealism. With the threat of the Sith gone, the galaxy is largely at peace, so the Republic expands its influence deeper into the Outer Rim, sharing resources and prosperity with new planets. When conflicts do arise, the Republic and the Jedi both seek peace and negotiation, as seen on the warring neighbor worlds of Irem and Darono. But a group of marauders called Nihil opposed the expansion of light and life into their territory. They wage war against the Republic in a corner of the Outer Rim, unleashing a nameless, terrifying weapon that has the power to petrify Jedi and any Force users. The ongoing High Republic books and comics first shaped this era, taking place 400 to 200 years before the events of the Skywalker Saga, but we will soon see the High Republic era in live action when The Acolyte premieres. That series is said to take place in the final days of the High Republic, so it should be around 1 century or so before the Battle of Yavin. We can break the High Republic down even further into 3 distinct phases. Quest of the Jedi starts at 500 BBY and lasts 118 years until 382 BBY. At this point, the Republic has become stable enough after the Sith Wars that they begin using Pathfinder teams to create new hyperspace lanes into the Outer Rim. A cult called the Path of the Open Hand rises to power, opposing all Force users, including the Jedi, believing manipulating the Force, even to save lives, is evil. Their hostility comes to a head in the battles of Jedha and Dalna, where the Nameless are first witnessed by the Jedi Order before disappearing. There's a 150-year gap before the next phase called Light of the Jedi, which begins in the year 252 BBY and goes 23 years to 229 BBY. In that gap, the Path of the Open Hand transforms themselves into the more aggressive Nihil Marauders, who once again use the Nameless to attack the Jedi and destroy a Republic space station called Starlight Beacon. The third phase is called Trials of the Jedi, lasting 9 more years from 229 BBY to 220. The books and comics are currently covering that time period, so we don't know everything about it, but it's centered around the corner of the galaxy the Nihil have taken by force. I assume by the end of that phase, the Nihil threat will be dealt with. And then we will have another 100-year or so gap before the events of the Acolyte take place, which we will learn more about later this year. Now we're reaching the point in the timeline where every other era combined takes place in less time than the High Republic alone. The fall of the Jedi era begins about 100 years before the events of A New Hope and lasts until the end of the Clone Wars in the year 19 BBY. During this time, the long-forgotten Sith Order begins to secretly rise in power once again. The events of the High Republic era change the Jedi and the Republic, leaving them more and more open to manipulation and corruption. The Jedi decommission the several outposts they had across the Outer Rim and become more isolated and centralized on Coruscant. Bureaucrats and greedy politicians multiply inside the Galactic Senate. The Sith Lord Darth Sidious maneuvers his way into the position of Supreme Chancellor and orchestrates several crises that push the galaxy into full-scale war. The Jedi are put on the front lines of the conflict and are eventually wiped out by their own troops. With no one left to oppose his rule, Sidious turns the Republic into the First Galactic Empire, and liberty dies with thunderous applause. As Emperor of the Galaxy, he takes on a new Sith apprentice, the former Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker turned Darth Vader, but Skywalker's 2 children are taken into hiding by 2 surviving Jedi Masters. This part of the timeline is, of course, defined by the prequel trilogy films and the Clone Wars animated series. The Reign of the Empire era lasts 19 years, taking us from the end of the Clone Wars all the way to the Battle of Scarif. The few surviving Jedi of the galaxy go into hiding, but many are hunted down by Darth Vader and his Inquisitors. The Empire grows unchecked, expanding its borders and military might. In secret, it constructs a massive space station called the Death Star, which has the power to destroy entire planets. The Empire and its Sith leader rule through fear above all else, but the sparks of rebellion spread across the galaxy. Regular citizens create a network called the Hidden Path to smuggle Jedi and other Force-sensitive people to safety. Small rebel cells form on numerous planets, working independently until a senator named Mon Mothma publicly denounces the Emperor and organizes them into a unified movement called the Rebel Alliance. As the rebels take bolder action, Imperial leadership tightens its grip on the galaxy, seeking to crush any hope of defiance. When the Alliance learns of the existence of the Death Star, the rebellion strikes out in its first act of open war against the Empire to steal the plans for the superweapon. This part of the timeline includes stories like Rogue One, Solo: A Star Wars Story, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, The Bad Batch, Star Wars Rebels, and the Star Wars Jedi video games. The Age of Rebellion era begins with the lead-up to the Battle of Yavin, the destruction of the Death Star, and takes us through the Battle of Jakku and the end of the Galactic Civil War 5 years later, making this the shortest era of the timeline. But that doesn't stop it from having more stories than any other era. After the destruction of Alderaan and the Rebel victory at the Battle of Yavin, more star systems rise up against the Empire. Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa, the children of Darth Vader, rise to prominence during this time. Leia cements herself as a primary leader of the Rebel Alliance and a symbol of hope. Luke learns the ways of the Force, becoming a full-fledged Jedi Knight after confronting his father, bringing Anakin Skywalker back to the light side of the Force. Darth Sidious and his empire are both defeated in the Battle of Endor. Imperial leadership lashes out in vicious attacks across the galaxy in what they call Operation Cinder. Their devastation continues for an entire year until the Empire finally officially surrenders at the Battle of Jakku. However, some governors and warlords refuse to give up, carving off pieces of the galaxy as their own territory. This part of the timeline is, of course, defined by the original Star Wars trilogy as well as the many books, comics, and video games that take place in between those films. The New Republic era begins after the Rebel Alliance transitioned into an official government called the New Republic, and lasts for over 2 decades. Although the Galactic Civil War has ended, undoing the damage done by the Empire proves challenging. Outer Rim planets fall into lawlessness, and the Imperial remnant is allowed to thrive in the distant reaches of the galaxy. New Republic outposts try to warn their leaders of a growing threat, but high-ranking officials turn a blind eye, hoping to avoid another war. Instead, the responsibility largely falls on citizens of the Outer Rim, like several Mandalorian clans, New Republic soldiers willing to defy orders, and a Jedi survivor named Ahsoka Tano who fails to prevent the return of a brilliant Imperial Grand Admiral named Thrawn. His homecoming will likely unite the Imperial Remnant under his leadership to mount one final campaign against the New Republic. During this time, Luke Skywalker begins a Jedi training academy and takes on his nephew, Leia's son, Ben Solo, as his first student. This section of the timeline is where many of the Star Wars streaming series take place, including The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and the upcoming series Skeleton Crew. The rise of the First Order era begins 28 years after the Battle of Yavin and takes us through to the Battle of Exegol 7 years later. Although the New Republic survives the Imperial Remnant, they still struggle to remain united and free of corruption. The spirit of Emperor Palpatine lives on in a clone body. From a hidden Sith world in the unknown regions, he orchestrates the rise of the First Order from the ashes of his empire. Leia learns of the danger and creates a resistance prepared to fight while the New Republic turns a blind eye. But her son, Ben Solo, falls to the dark side after a huge misunderstanding with Luke Skywalker. He takes up the name Kylo Ren and joins the First Order. With a new superweapon, they destroy the New Republic Senate and take control of the galaxy for 1 year. Leia's resistance fights back with the help of Palpatine's granddaughter, Rey, who learns to become a Jedi under both Luke and Leia. She and the Resistance help inspire the rest of the galaxy to stand against oppression and the dark side, defeating Darth Sidious, his forces, and the Sith Order once and for all. This part of the timeline is obviously mostly made up of the sequel trilogy films and the animated series Star Wars Resistance. The new Jedi Order era is currently the final era that we know of in the canon Star Wars timeline. I imagine it will begin immediately or shortly after the rise and fall of the First Order. While this was a major era in Star Wars Legends, we know next to nothing about it in canon right now. But similar to the Dawn of the Jedi era, it will be defined by an upcoming movie involving Rey and her efforts to create a new Jedi Order. It'll take place 15 years after the Battle of Exegol and the other events of the Rise of Skywalker, which is 50 years after the Battle of Yavin. I expect she will have made some decent strides by then, hopefully having some students. Hopefully Finn will also be a Jedi. The only thing we can say about the bigger picture is a quote from director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, who said the new Jedi Order would be opposed by rising powers that hope to destroy them, which is vague and unsurprising. I wonder if those powers will be made up of just regular people instead of some rival darkside group. It would be interesting if some people felt similar to Luke in The Last Jedi, that the Jedi Order just causes problems and should be a thing of the past. That would give the movie a great opportunity to explore why the Jedi are important, but the fact of the matter is, this is the era we know the least about right now. Like I said, in Legends, the New Jedi Order was a major era for Star Wars books. It was centered around an extragalactic invasion by the Yuuzhan Vong, warrior aliens that devastated the galaxy and nearly destroyed the New Republic. They posed a major challenge for Luke's new Jedi Order, and their attack saw the deaths of Chewbacca and Han and Leia's son Anakin Solo. The war lasted from 25 to 29 years after the Battle of Yavin, so it was far earlier than Rey's movie will take place. I bring this up because fans have been wondering if the Yuuzhan Vong will appear in the next Star Wars film, and I doubt it. Based on what we've heard about opposition to the Jedi specifically, instead of a new galactic threat, I doubt the Vong will pop up. But it is worth noting that they were nearly brought into an arc of the Clone Wars, so I wouldn't say it's completely off the table either. But that brings us to the end of my speculation for the new Jedi Order, so that's where this video ends. We'll obviously learn more about the Dawn of the Jedi, the Old Republic, and the new Jedi Order in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if we got some more eras thrown into the past at some point, but this information should stay pretty current for a while. At least until the new Jedi Order movie gets here, so that's it for today. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.